some of the information that's come out in the last 24 hours is shocking beyond belief. Let's look at this clip first of all. It's from WFAA News, and they talk about how this could have gone, basically, if the police had just followed their own practice. Now, just listen to what they've got to say, what actually it was, and then we've got a clip from CNN coming up, which is more about the timeline. So have a listen to this report talking about what actually happened inside that building on the day of the massacre.
Within 3 minutes of the shooter entering the school, police had enough manpower and firepower. They'd all been trained to go in, but none of them did.
One error.
Now, this is a really important picture, not to go over that, because within 3 minutes, right, they talk about the timestamp here. I believe this is 19 minutes after the phone call. And the thing that's really important is that means within, say, 15 to 20 minutes, as you can see here that I'm circling if you're watching, there is a ballistic shield and that these officers are holding rifles. So in the building, within about 10 to 20 minutes, are rifles and ballistic shields. That's really important to know from this image as we continue this conversation.
14 minutes and 8 seconds. That's how long the children waited and the teachers waited in rooms 111 to be rescued.
DPS Director Steve McCraw testified that the police response in Uvalde was an abject failure, waiting for rifles that were already there, shields that had already arrived, a key they did not need because the door to the classroom where an 18-year-old with an AR-15 was shooting children and teachers was not locked.
So there's a really important point. We got told, the press got told by the police, there was actually quite a emotional message put forth by some of the police who were there on the day saying they were trying the key in the door. Now, how it was either sold or interpreted was the police were trying to get into the classroom with the key. The truth was they were using a different door and they were looking for a master key. So they weren't actually attempting to get into the door where the shooter was. They were trying a different door somewhere else in the school to try and locate a master key so they could go and use it on the door where the shooter was. But as you've already heard in this report, that door was not locked. So at no stage did any police officer go up to the door where the shooter was and turn the handle, because the door, as they've just said, where the shooter was not locked.
But no one checked it.
So the door was unsecured, and we've gone back and checked in our interviews, and did anybody touch the door and try it? No one had.
The hearing laid much of the blame on Uvalde Schools Police Chief Pete Arredondo.
I don't believe there's any training in the world that could have helped this incident, Commander.
But DPS troopers were in that hallway too.
If y'all would have just taken over in charge, you would have been able to save lives.
So the thing we don't really understand in New Zealand is they have many kind of police forces in America. You've got the sheriff's department, you've got the police department, you've got the town over with a different police department, and you've got the border patrol. And so what they're saying is, there was another police agency in the building, but they didn't have seniority or authority to make the decision to move in. So they were basically hamstrung to not be able to action what they thought maybe they needed to. Now, I guess we can never know whether they thought they needed to do it or not, because maybe coincidentally later on reflection, they're going, hey, we should probably say we thought we should go in, but we don't know whether they thought that or not. But the point being is that the I guess the governing police authority, the one that was actually from the area who were in charge, they were the ones that made the decisions to wait for the rifles that were already there, and for the ballistic shields that were already there, and for looking for the key that they didn't need.
So McCraw was asked why his officers didn't go in themselves.
It's dangerous to self-deploy.
Ava Morales' husband tried. She was a teacher. He's a Uvalde ISD officer. She told him she was shot in a phone call.
And what happened to him was he tried to move forward into the hallway. He was detained, and they took his gun away from him and escorted him off the scene.
Morales died. So did fellow teacher Irma Garcia and 19 students. In the same classroom the shooter had gone to fourth grade in less than a decade before.
So I'm sure it's not the only one, but one of the police officers that was prepared to go in, because his wife was in there, the police detained him and took his firearm off him and escorted him out of the building. So that's the, and if you've seen the YouTube write-up we've got for this, I think I mentioned in there about a cover-up about their ineptitude from the police, whether it's willful ignorance or not. These are the situations that are coming out today as they look at what happened at Uvalde. We want to go on and play you another clip about this as well. And remember that there were rifles and there were ballistic shields in the building at the time, because there is a reference in this piece, which is really looking at the timeline more closely, that some were saying there was only pistols in the building. But even if that was the case, right, if there were only pistols in the building and the shooter had an AR-15, which is a semi-automatic, I've said this before and I'll say it again, it's the police's job to put themselves in harm's way. As harsh as it sounds, if there is going to be a bullet fired, it's actually the duty of the police officer at the very worst end of the spectrum to put him or herself in harm's way between that bullet and the citizen, right? To protect and serve. That's the calling of the American police officer. Their job description is to get in there in dangerous situations at times and put themselves at peril so citizens don't have to. Now, that might sound very easy to say, and it is, and very hard to do. So be it. That's part of the job description. So here's the CNN clip that's talking a little bit about the actual timeline for what happened now that we are finding out, because what's happening is they've got CCTV footage with timestamps on them, so they know exactly where the police were in the building, when they were, and what they had. And this is why the police are being made to look not just incompetent, but perhaps criminally responsible for some actions.
Outrage palpable in Uvalde, Texas, as the first image from inside Robb Elementary during the shooting is released by the Austin American-Statesman. This surveillance picture shows officers standing in the school's hallway with rifles and a ballistic shield with a timestamp of 19 minutes after officials say the gunman entered the school.
It shows in the minds of at least some investigators reviewing what happened that day is that authorities had adequate firepower and adequate protective equipment. 58 minutes passed from the time we see these officers in that video, in that screen grab, to when they ultimately breach that classroom.
Just 12 minutes before, at 11:40, Uvalde School District Police Chief Pete Arredondo called the Uvalde Police Department from inside the school asking for help. According to a transcript, Arredondo says, "It's an emergency right now. We have him in the room. He's got an AR-15. He's shot a lot. They need to be outside the building prepared because we don't have firepower right now. It's all pistols." After reviewing body camera footage, the Statesman writes Arredondo was trying to find keys to open the classroom's doors, even though officials say they do not believe officers had tried to open either door. The Texas Tribune.
I just want to pause here because I'm realizing there is some audio content as well, so people who aren't going to see this footage. So it reads, this is the timeline of the shooting. 11:36 a.m., 11 officers entered the school. 11:40 a.m., Police Chief Pete Arredondo calls Department for help. 11:52 a.m., first officer with ballistic shield arrives on the scene. So that's where the ballistic shield arrives. 11:40 was the phone call we were just hearing about, where they said there's only pistols in the situation. So if that was the case for 11:40, by 11:52, that situation was in hand because ballistic shields had arrived on scene, and also there was more than pistols. Further down the timeline, it says at 12:46, Arredondo gives order to breach the classroom. So that's an hour and 6 minutes after his phone call. 12:50, officers enter the classroom. So that's the timeline that's on screen for people who are listening.
Reports officers held their positions outside the adjoining classrooms as the gunman fired at least 3 more times. The Tribune released a surveillance picture, it says, is from 12:04 p.m. that shows multiple officers with at least 2 ballistic shields. Police would not enter the classroom for another 46 minutes.
So again, for people who are listening, what we're seeing is police officers behind shields at the end of the hallway. They're not even outside the classroom. So it's almost like the police are in some kind of formation of almost retreat. They are so far away from the door to the classroom and they're hiding behind ballistic shields. Now, I'm not suggesting that the police shouldn't be behind ballistic shields if they're about to breach, but it's almost like for their own safety, They're as far away as they can possibly be whilst being able to see the classroom door but not approach the classroom door. Again, with the greatest of respect to the danger that police put themselves in front of us for, that is not their job. Their job is not to keep themselves safe as far away from a situation as possible whilst they watch it. Their job is to get in there and put themselves in harm's way if needed. Hopefully that'll never be needed, but if needed, to keep their citizens safe, to protect and serve.
In transcripts reviewed by the Tribune, officers were growing impatient. One agent asks, "Are there still kids in the classroom?" To which another agent answers, "It is unknown at this time." The agent replies, "You all don't know if there's kids in there. If there's kids in there, we need to go in there." The other agent responds, "Whoever is in charge will determine that."
All of those officers are trained in an active shooter situation. And from the very beginning, even the ones that didn't have the ballistic shields, they should have just gone in. That's what their protocol suggests. Children were left in a room, scared to death, calling 911, and yet no one went in.
So again, just to reiterate what's just been said by a Democrat, I think he was a congressman, wasn't he, is that the protocols that the police follow is whether they have protection or not, they should go in. And they didn't for such a long time. This is devastating news on so many levels, most devastating for the families of the murdered children and teachers, obviously, because they're now sitting there going, why did these police not do anything? But it's also devastating. I mean, when I say for the police, I mean, I'm not trying to empathize or sympathize with them, but if you're not going to follow through even on your own rules, then what's the point? What are you doing? I mean, if you just followed protocol, you would have tried to breach that door with or without rifles, with or without ballistic shields. But they waited, whatever the number was, 56 minutes after they had shields and after they had rifles to get into a classroom. That door was unlocked. Speaking of doors as well, there's also a conversation that I heard today that there was some blame put on a teacher for the door that the gunman got into being like held open with a brick for air. But my understanding from a commentary I heard today was that that door was actually faulty and it wasn't left open like ajar. The shooter just walked in. So there's some, we just got to harden
irrelevant.
We just got to harden our schools and then everything will be fine. Well, that school did have a security door and was more hardened and it was not functioning. So it didn't really seem to be much of an issue. Sorry, George, you go.
Oh no, I just think there's to try and distract with the teacher leaving a door open from the cops is just fucking dirty, right? It shows how I think they are sort of realizing that they fucked up, and it seems like they've been trying from day dot to cover it up. Even the whole thing about trying to find a key seems dodgy to me. So the information coming out in this Texas Senate hearing has been really interesting. It seems like there will eventually be a FBI investigation, so there's going to be that extra layer of accountability, transparency, and investigation, especially basically the mayor and federal and representatives and the federal level when it comes to the Congress have basically said that people share from the local sheriff's department, etc., are still not fully cooperating with things like the Texas Senate investigation. So, hopefully that FBI investigation brings out more of that, because it definitely seems like there's been some sort of cover up for the fuck up.
I wonder as well, now that you've I'm thinking about it now as we're talking about it, is because the nature of America is so litigious, because if you do anything wrong or you're proven to do something wrong, you get sued for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, that a police station, a group of police officers, a police department. I remember there is I don't remember what the theory is called, but there's a theory in business that you never apologize and you never say you're wrong. Because as soon as you apologize and you say you're wrong, you're culpable for whatever the situation is. Now, I've been told that here in New Zealand, So it's not necessarily about a litigious thing. But one of the things I wonder that hamper these conversations being honest in America is as soon as the police officers themselves say, we cock this up so badly, then of course that police department is going to have hundreds of millions of dollars of lawsuits from the families of the shot and murdered children and teachers. And what happens there is the town actually pays for it, not the police officers. So therefore the townspeople end up paying for the stuff that the police officers do wrong. So anytime you see these things about, such and such got beaten up and arrested illegally and they were sued and they got a $3 million settlement, I don't know what they call it in America, but here in New Zealand it would be our rates. Our rates who run that police department then end up paying for the legal fees as well. So I don't know. I wonder if that situation, that system of being sued all the time actually is just another layer of why you need to hush things up, keep things secret and never admit fault. Because as soon as you do, there's $100 million lawsuit from 10 families.